I am Kimmery Martin, and this is the story behind my stories.
You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
J.T. Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Thor,
Corey Dr. O,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mott,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Sherwin Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
Kimmery Martin.
Thanks for tuning into Author Stories. I really appreciate you listening. If you go to hankgarner.com, you can go through all of the archives, more than 300 shows, author interviews with the very best people in publishing today. On the right-hand sidebar, there's places where you can subscribe for just about every platform that you could possibly listen to the show on. I'd like to thank some sponsors today for their faithful support and for enabling us to bring you quality content like we do. Crystal Watanabe from Pico's House is one of the best editors I've ever met and whose work I really admire. She offers developmental editing, line editing, and beta reading. She's currently booking for May, so go ahead and send her a message now to get your project scheduled with her. She has 4 proofreaders on staff, so she can accommodate authors with much shorter lead time than some other editors do. She's a new affiliate member of the SFWA, and she comes recommended by best-selling authors such as Hugh Howey and Samuel Peralta. Most of her experiences with science fiction, speculative fiction, and middle-grade fantasy, but she really enjoys editing all genres and can really make your project shine. If you will mention Author Stories when booking your editing services, you can receive a $75 discount on manuscripts over 60,000 in length or a $25 discount on short stories. Pico's House, Pickoshouse. Please tell Crystal that you heard about it on Author Stories. Also, the Debt Collector series by Chuck Buda. Debt is a death sentence. Michael Wright lives the American dream. He works hard every day but still lives paycheck to paycheck. The bills keep piling up and now his 10-year-old daughter requires surgery to save her life. Michael is in a race against time to find money, but how far is he willing to go? Is he prepared to do whatever it takes? Can he defeat a menacing evil that stands in his way? The Debt Collector series is a gripping tale of psychological horror, raising questions about our modern lifestyles and the terrifying possibilities that hit too close to home. One reader described it as if serial killers and Wall Street made friends. Pay up and die, delinquent, bankrupt. The Debt Collector series is available in paperback and ebook formats exclusively from Amazon or free through Amazon Kindle Unlimited. Walk Beside Me by Christine Handy. Willow Adair has a picture-perfect life, or so it seems. A stunning model turned wife and mother, she lives in a beautiful home with her husband and 2 kids in historic Bexley, one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in Columbus, Ohio. On the outside, she has everything. On the inside, she struggles with issues of self-worth. Spurned by her neglectful husband and hated by her rebellious teen daughter, Willow never feels she is good enough. She fears everyone she loves will leave. Walk Beside Me is the story of a woman who peels away the layers to find her inner warrior, a woman who faces insurmountable odds and thanks to her earthly angels, learns to treasure the gift of God's infinite light and love. Walk Beside Me by Christine Handy. Thank you to all of our sponsors for making the show possible. If you would like to sponsor the show, please go to hankgarner.com, and there's a link in the top menu bar where you can do that. At the end of the show, if you'll stick around, we're going to have an audiobook clip from Richard Gleaves, the Jason Crane series. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to have Kimmery Martin on the show with me today. She has a brand new book that is out now called The Queen of Hearts, and I've had a copy of this book for a week or 2 now, and it's really fantastic. I think you all are really going to love it. Welcome to the show, Kimmery.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
Well, Kimmery, I begin each show with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or a storyteller?
That is a great question. I did not actually start writing until relatively late in life, but I can remember as a very young girl suddenly realizing what the world of fiction was after I read the book Eloise, which I'm sure most people are familiar with, and the little girl that lives in the plaza, and she's 6 years old, and she has this fantastic imagination. And I read that book and then realized there was a person's name on the front of it, and that somehow it occurred to me that a grown-up had invented Eloise and that she wasn't real, because when you're little, you kind of think that everything is half real or entirely real. And I guess that triggered something in my mind that lay dormant for a long time until I tried writing myself.
You didn't you have a win a writing contest early on, like in the first grade or something?
Yeah, that's true. That was pretty much the sum of my writing experience until lately. I won a short story contest in the first grade, and they gave me a red stuffed elephant toy.
Nice. You know, that's a huge thing for a kid to have recognition. You know, I hear so many stories of people that have a teacher or a parent or someone who, you know, recognizes that there's the storytelling gift in a kid and they encourage them. And then you write a story or something and you see it in print. And I think it really does plant a seed. And maybe it doesn't, you know, sprout until later in life. But I think those early experiences are, have so much power and meaning in a writer's life.
Oh, absolutely. And being inspired by a creative teacher is huge.
Yeah, for sure. So you loved Eloise. What other kinds of stories did you love as a kid?
Well, I am and I have always been a huge bookworm, which for me really is the genesis of becoming a writer, was my fascination with the stories that people told. And I read at least 2 books a week, sometimes more, even now. And I started reviewing books and interviewing authors myself a few years ago. But as a child, I read every single book I could get my hands on. I read every book we had at our local library. Then I started reading the adult books, which is probably how I figured out way more than I should have about the world when I was a kid. And I read all the classics and loved them. But if it weren't for being a reader first, I never would have been a writer.
Yeah, for sure. So, you said that you weren't really bitten by the writing bug until later in life. So what did you pursue as a career, and, what did you see yourself being in life?
I was a late bloomer when it came to figuring out what I wanted to do with my life. I think I was in my junior year of college and still had no plan. And I wound up going to medical school and becoming an ER doctor. And I'm a bit of a science nerd. I really like scientific analysis, and I like reading about science. And I'm a people person too. I like interacting with other people, and it seemed like a nice mix of those two things. And then transitioning from being a doctor to a writer naturally gave me a whole lot of material to work with as far as experiences and interesting stories and that kind of thing.
Was that ever a conscious thing that you're working in the ER or you're in medical school or whatever, and you find yourself thinking, oh, I wonder what I could add to this story, or I wonder what this patient's backstory is? Do you ever find yourself kind of elaborating on the thing you find in front of you?
Well, I do that now. I think once you start writing, the way your brain works actually changes, because you start mentally describing and cataloging everything, from the way someone's appearance is to the interesting thing going on in the background behind them to, whatever's happening. You think about it in a whole new way once you're a writer. But probably one of the great regrets of my life is that I didn't keep a journal through my medical training in the early years of my practice. I wish that I had. There were so many dramatic and horrible and wonderful and death-defying things that I saw, and that probably I can't remember anymore.
Wow. So what was the idea or the catalyst or whatever it was that made you say, I want to write a book?
It was just this ongoing admiration for the writers. This is going to be a little embarrassing, but do you remember the summer when everybody was reading 50 Shades of Grey on their Kindles, sort of surreptitiously.
Yes, yes.
I read it and I thought, geez, I could write a book too. And I didn't mean that I could write a, softcore porn book, but but here's a person that, took something she was interested in and wrote about it and became hugely successful. And I said to my husband, I'm going to try to write a book too. And he sort of laughed at me, but I remember thinking, okay, I am going to try to do this. I'm a weird nerd. I enjoy reading other people's work so much that I think I can do it. And I sat down and tried, and it took a long time, but I did do it.
You mentioned earlier that you started interviewing authors. How did you do that, and what was your motivation for doing that?
Well, I read so much that I needed a way to keep track of what I was reading, so I started writing it down, and then that evolved into a website where I listed what I was reading. And then I started doing reviews, and people asked me if I would share them, and I wound up publishing them on a local website in my city, Charlotte, a parenting website. I started being their resident book reviewer, and I was having so much fun with that. I loved working on a book review that other people would read and share, and from that I evolved into wanting to write a little bit more, which ultimately helped me a lot in writing the book.
Because I interview a lot of authors. We've had over 320 shows, and different guests every week. I have learned so much from just picking the brains of other people and looking for the one little nugget, that makes, one writer different from another, and, really, exploring people's, past experiences and things like that. I couldn't imagine where I would be as a writer if I had not done that. What do you think you gained or gleaned from just kind of surrounding yourself with other people and really digging into their work?
Well, first and foremost, inspiration. But I had this tremendous awe at how different people can take similar material and make it so utterly completely separate, and part of that is an author's voice. It's that magical quality that a writer has that lets you know those words are coming from them. I gave a talk on writing to a 6th grade class recently, and I put up some examples of paragraphs from well-known books that they would have read, middle grade books, and said, who wrote this? And quite a few of these kids could read a paragraph that didn't have any big clues and tell you who the author was. And so I started analyzing the concept of voice, what makes an author's words stand out and how they sound and the way they portray things. To me, that's fascinating.
Yeah, for sure. You can read, any number of books from genre fiction, and whatever genre it is, you're gonna always use, some similar tropes. Kind of think of it as the writer's toolbox. If you're writing fantasy, then you're gonna have elves and wizards and, things like that. If it's science fiction, you may have spaceships and laser blasters and whatever. And you all kind of approach the canvas with similar brushes. But the author's voice is what makes it really stand out. What did you learn about finding your own voice through this and through the process of writing?
Well, for me, that was the easiest part of writing. I right away had no trouble knowing how I was going to sound. I did struggle a little bit with some of the technicalities, especially because I'm not a trained writer. For instance, I wrote this entire novel in the third person and then realized that was wrong for my voice. And I had to go through and change every single line to the first person. And ironically, I didn't have any interest from literary agents with my early efforts at trying to pitch the novel. And once I changed it to first person, I started to get a lot more traction. But as far as the words themselves and the way my voice sounds, I don't know how to describe how it came about, but it was very easy for me to stay consistent to one tone or one kind of voice.
So, what was the idea for this book? What was the kind of inciting incident in your life that brought this book alive to you?
Well, obviously, they tell debut authors to write what you know, and I know medicine, and there was never any question in my mind that I would place the book in a medical setting. So that part was easy. For me, my own years in medical school were formative. I had very intense friendships, that long lasting, and have endured through, every possible kind of good thing and bad thing. And I wanted to capture some of that in the book, because when you're in medical training and early in a medical career, that's your whole social world. You don't really meet a lot of other people. And I wanted to write about a group of friends who have this work hard, play hard life, where they're doing very impactful things at their jobs, but they're also spending time together and forming relationships and romantic entanglements and all of that. And gradually I narrowed the story down to focus on two of the friends.
Nice. When you started writing, did you get the characters first? Did you get a scenario for them to come in, or did the plot kind of work out as you developed the characters?
It was definitely character driven for me. I had the characters in mind without any semblance of a plot in mind. I'm a pantser. And I wouldn't necessarily recommend that. It led to a ton of revision. But yeah, I didn't really have a plot in mind until I was many chapters into it and had to go back and make things fit.
A lot of the blurbs that I've read and stuff, say things like fans of Grey's Anatomy are sure to enjoy this. And I have 3 daughters, and there's been a lot of Grey's Anatomy in our house, over the last several years. Does that comparison bother you, as a physician who's an actual physician, not just one that plays one on TV or writes about one in novels? Do you ever cringe when you watch stuff on TV and like, oh my gosh, that's totally not how that happens? And how do you approach it as a writer to make things believable yet, keep things snappy and moving along and without being too serious?
Well, I love the comparison to Grey's Anatomy because people love that show. But the funny thing is I'm not a TV watcher and I have never seen it. I don't think I've ever seen any medical show, except for I saw a few episodes of ER when it first came out. But yeah, I would totally be that person rooting for everyone else. I'm sure I'd be like, no, this is not what happened. So I think it's a good comparison from what I've heard. I haven't actually seen it myself to know, but it doesn't bother me.
Gotcha. Well, if people are not familiar with the book, what is your pitch to them for what is the book about, and what do you think people will find intriguing about it?
Yeah, so it is a medical drama, but there's quite a bit thrown into it as well. It's primarily about 2 women physicians. One is a cardiologist and one is a trauma surgeon. They live in Charlotte, North Carolina, and one of them is hiding a very significant secret from the other one.
Interesting. So does the book follow these 2 characters throughout? Are there other love interest and things that are introduced?
Yes, so it takes place in 2 different time periods. Part of it is set in the past when the women were in medical school, and part of it is in their present day lives as wives and mothers and practicing physicians. And it's kind of a love gone wrong story. The focus of the novel is more on female friendship, but there are definitely some, romantic shenanigans going on with, in particular, there's one character who is a catalyst for a lot of the action, and he's a former chief resident of the women when they were in medical school.
Are there inherent challenges to writing the 2 different timelines when you're writing? Because you said you're a pantser. How do you juggle those 2 and make sure that you're weaving kind of in and out of those timelines and keep the reader wondering what's going on from chapter to chapter?
Well, ironically, I wrote the novel initially all set in the medical school days, what became the past. And it wasn't until I started reading through that I thought, I'd really like to know what happens to these people after they get out of medical school, and how does the secret between them impact them later on in life. And so I started weaving in present day chapters to the stuff I had already written. Again, probably not the ideal way to go about structuring a novel, but that required me to go back and change things here and there, but it worked out more smoothly than I thought it would, and it made it a better novel for sure.
Nice. You have a fantastic blog, thedebutanteball.com, where you talk about everything on there, including really laying bare your journey to publishing. You've got a great blog post there with your full timeline to publication from querying agents down to, the book dropping. And I think people will find it really interesting that, you queried agents at the beginning of January 2016, signed your contract in April, and I think people would find it really interesting, all of the steps that went into getting the book to where it is now. In the beginning, did you have any idea that the publishing process was going to be so kind of arduous and so many steps, or did you still have rose-colored glasses from not knowing anything about the industry yet?
No, I was charmingly innocent when I started. I think if I had known from the outset how difficult it would be to get published, it would have been daunting. But luckily, I didn't know, and so I went. I forged blithely ahead without too much fear in the beginning. But it was hard for me. I was a bad query letter writer. My initial queries, they were just terrible. Like, I cringe when I read them. And you mentioned the Debutante Ball, which is a writing website that features 5 debut novelists every year, or debut writers every year. I think there was a post I did early on about some of the massive query mistakes that I made. And I got to the point where I would hear an email coming into my computer and my cheeks would flame up and get red because I just knew it was going to be another form rejection of my query letter. So I did have to persevere through some struggles.
You also wrote a post on there. What was it called? Kimmery's top 10 tips for a good first draft. And, I think one thing people will be pleasantly surprised, from your new book, The Queen of Hearts, is it's really funny. There's lots of life, and there's lots of kind of serious moments, but it's really funny as well. And that really comes out in some of your other writing, like the blog post and stuff. The top 10 tips for a good first draft. I laughed out loud at some of those. What was the motivation for writing that post?
Probably I was sitting there thinking, well, let's make a list of what I did when I was starting out, and we'll tell other people not to do it. It's a sarcastic post, obviously.
Yeah.
Yeah, I probably did about 8 of those things. I can't remember what they all are, but.
You can tell that it was written, tongue firmly in cheek. But as I was reading this, I was like, everybody knows that you're being sarcastic, but you know what? These are actual things that people, that all of us do when we're starting off. Just sprinkling adverbs everywhere. Showing them or telling everything instead of doing. And do any of these really jump out at you as something that this was something that you definitely did and had to adjust your writing to get away from?
Well, I literally had the sentence, all hell breaks loose, in one of my early drafts.
I love it.
So I was like, yeah, you get stuck, just plop that sentence down into your novel and you're good. Out of anything.
Oh, it's so funny. So funny. What do you think people would be surprised to learn about you?
I am super disorganized. People always ask me, how do you do it? You're a mom with a bunch of kids, and you're a doctor, and you've written a novel, and I do this volunteering, and my day-to-day life is like just this big stream of chaos where, I'm frequently operating on no hygiene and my house is a mess and I've not paid bills and I've forgotten to answer emails. I really don't want to propagate the myth that you can do it all and do it well, or at least I cannot.
You like to write travelogues when you travel. What's the fascination with kind of journaling what's going on as you travel the world?
Well, I am a big travel junkie, and now that I'm a writer, like I said earlier, you view the world through this very different lens where you're mentally describing everything as you see it. And for me, I think it's partly because I grew up in a very rural space, literally in a holler in Kentucky in the mountains. And so to me, I've always had this fascination with other places and how remarkable and different and vibrant the world is, and getting to see all these other places. And I like the idea of writing that down and sharing it with other people. And because I'm kind of smart-ass, there's an element of humor to my travel writings too, which is basically a what not to do when you go to wherever it is.
That's what I love about it. It's so funny because I'm kind of the same way. I think self-deprecating humor is like my default. If you can learn to kind of poke fun at yourself and look at look at how things go wrong and how just our foibles come through and everything. I think that's a great trait to have.
Yeah, definitely. Especially when you're traveling.
Yeah. So because you finished this book a couple of years ago, and I know editing and all that went into it, as you're waiting for the book to publish, what do you do with yourself? Have you started another book?
Yeah. So immediately after wrestling the Queen of Hearts into some kind of decent shape, I started writing another book, and I was very passionate about that book. It's I mentioned, I think, that I'm a big science nerd, and so this one is sort of a science-y, biotech-driven, but also character-driven thriller. And I was about at least half the way through it, and I got an agent progressing with the book, and hey, I've written this biotech thriller, and she's like, no, you need to kind of stay with the same genre. Your publisher would like another book that's women's fiction, and ideally women's fiction about another female doctor. And I said, well, I already wrote that book. But I started thinking about it, and I thought, yeah, I could definitely spin off some of the characters in the Queen of Hearts and come up with an interesting story about it. But I didn't really realize that, if you do establish a group of readers, they probably do want to see something similar from you in the next book. But it is my secret goal to get that biotech thriller published someday.
Well, that's a really great point, because I think, most of us writers read a lot of different genres. And so we write a book in one genre and think, well, I've done that. I'm ready to move on to something else now. But I think that's when the writer's skill really kicks in. And instead of just following, every whim and wanting to scratch every writerly itch that we have, digging in and really doing the work to write again in the same genre, I think really helps you to grow as a writer. Have you found that experience to be true?
Yeah, I'm not experienced enough to know. I mean, I actually think it's hard, much harder to write the second book, which is sort of universally true. Everyone says that. But one of the reasons it's so much more difficult is, you don't want to be derivative of your first book, and you don't want to rewrite your first book. And it's hard not to, especially when your voice is so distinct, it's hard not to repeat those elements in another book. I would like to experienced authors to answer that question, because I'm kind of right in the throes of it now.
Gotcha. Well, the new book is called The Queen of Hearts. It's out right now. Kimmery, what if someone is intrigued in the book but is not quite sold yet? What would you tell them about the book that you hope they take away from it?
Well, my goal was to write a book that was entertaining, and there's a lot of drama in the book, a whole lot of drama in the book. So you should be entertained. But I also wanted to write a women's fiction novel that was reasonably smart and that gave you a, fly on the wall glimpse at this world that I know so well.
Excellent. The book is out everywhere now. It's called The Queen of Hearts by Kimmery Martin. Kimmery, where can people find you online if they want to follow along and get plugged in with you and go on this crazy journey with you?
Yeah, thank you. I have my own website, which is kimmerymartin.com. And I do have a lot of book reviews and author interviews, travel writing and stuff on that. And until the summer, I'll be writing for the debutanteball.com, along with 4 other women writers. And that's a great resource. There's a ton of agent interviews and author interviews and writing advice and funny writing boards and giveaways on that website. And then I really love Instagram. I'm on there as Kimmery Martin, and I publish a lot of book pictures. In particular, I've asked my friends around the world to take pictures of my book and whatever beautiful or iconic locations they're in and send them to me. So I have pictures of the Queen of Hearts in 20, 30 countries probably.
Nice. Well, I need to do that with mine and tag you on Instagram. I'll do that. Kimmery, thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show today. We're going to send everybody to pick up a copy of The Queen of Hearts.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the Author Stories podcast. For more great author interviews like this one, go to hankgarner.com and dig through the archives. There's something there I know you'll love. Now stay tuned for a special audio clip from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
I found Absalom in the parlor by the fireplace. Irving had encouraged his guests to reenact the famous Van Tassel party of the legend and tell ghost stories. The brandy poured freely, the men smoked, and the chestnut tails of the region were trotted out one by one in parade. The White Lady of Raven Rock, the ghost of poor Major Andre, hanged from the tulip tree aside the post road, and, of course, the Headless Horseman. "Did you ride that night, Brom?" asked young Joseph Martling. "Was it you that affrighted the schoolteacher?" Brom sat, and all eyes were on him. "Whatever the truth, I hope his son will forgive my part in it." "There's nothing to forgive," said the son of Ichabod. "It's a grand work, Mr. Irving. A grand fiction." On the mantel a bronze clock chimed 11. "'Tis almost the witching hour," said Irving. "Time for all children to be abed, lest they be caught on the road." "I would not be caught dead on the road tonight," said Martling, who lived nearby. "Why not?" said I. "Let us ride Ichabod's route back to Beekman Town in commemoration." The young men cheered the idea. I turned to Absalom. "Would you join us?" "No. It's absurd." The Sleepy Hollow boys jeered at him. Absalom sighed. "Very well, then. We will ride together as a group." The gloom that found us on the road was terrible. In those days no gas lights lit the post road, and the way from Roost to the bridge crossing still wound past Wildy Swamp, fearfully black at that hour. I watched Absalom riding to my left. He was a thin, spectral thing in the moonlight. Idle talk died on our lips, and our small band rode with only the sound of horse hooves for accompaniment. "There it is," whispered Martling. "The hanging tree." The old tulip tree twisted against the starry sky. The road broke to either side of it. "That is where your father is said to have first seen the thing." My companion had slowed, gazing fearfully at the branches above. "I saw something," he whispered. "I saw a body swinging from the tree." "Come now, Absalom. You don't believe in ghosts, do you? Hurry up, then, quick, before the horseman rides. You can't reason with a headless man." As if on cue, a wind rose. Branches tore and leaves swept the air. A terrible cracking laugh rose all around. Eyes opened and watched us from the deep. The faces of spirits appeared. Horrors rose from the Andre brook. Our horses whinnied and reared. Absalom grabbed my arm and pointed. The horseman stood on the slope above. He raised his hatchet. His army of ghosts fell upon us. My horse and I turned circles, terrorized and confused. Young Martling shouted, "We have to make the bridge!" and rode off. "Make the bridge!" cried the others as one, and our companions scattered, tearing up the post road with a clatter of frantic hooves. "Make the bridge!" The horseman gathered his form and lunged at Absalom. Young Crane dodged the blade, dug heels into the flanks of his steed, and fled. Cries of "Make the bridge!" echoed all around. "Where?" cried Absalom, galloping into the swamp, his voice distant and small. "Where is the bridge? Someone tell me! Help!" He was gone before I could answer. Yet what could I have said? The bridge of legend is gone, torn down. It shall never be crossed again. I watched Absalom splash into Wildy Swamp, the horseman in pursuit. And I knew what his fate would be.